All right, so for today's video, I wanted to talk about basically how messiahs or savior figures of any kind are in this reincarnation soul trap are controlled opposition, basically. And this is something that I realize now because after looking into like the way the system tries to control the opposition to make people sit on their hands and do nothing, right? And that is something that the system is very good at doing, and you see this with people who they claim to be red pill, but then they're like, oh my gosh, Trump's gonna fix everything, and oh my gosh, it's Elon Musk, right? You have like those people, right, who believe that that someone's coming to save them, right? And then on a spiritual level, this is also true, like the controlled opposition stuff. This is also something that happens, which is that people believe that like the Pleiadians or like the benevolent aliens, or like Jesus is gonna come back, or like the Buddha Maitreya is gonna come back, and like the prophecy foretells this at the end of the Kali Yuga, right? It's like all of this other, yeah, it's like all of this BS to get people to basically give away their power to something, to some cavalry that's just above the horizon, that's coming to save them, even though it doesn't exist. And the change and like the defeat of evil by whatever Messiah figure, it's always in the future and it's never now, right? And then that's a sign of deception. It's like it's always in the future. It's always in some vague future. Like, oh, we just gotta have faith and we just have to wait. Like, no, that's fucking bullshit. And speaking of like the Messiah figures, right? A lot of these people are controlled opposition. I do believe that like the Buddha, that Jesus Christ, that Muhammad, that a lot of these figures throughout history have essentially are essentially planted there by the Matrix as control. And that's not a popular opinion. That's not an opinion that I think is very popular, because people are so attached to their saviors because of their learned helplessness. People are so attached to their savior figures, to their sort of false heroes, that anytime you say, oh, okay, what if they're not actually coming to save us? What, like, you question it. You're not even outright saying that like this person's bad, or good. You just say, okay, what if they're not? What if that's like a lie? Like, what if like they're not coming to save us? And like, what if that's another thing that it gets people to sit down? Like, anything to get people to sit down and do nothing. What could an invading force on this planet want more than for people to sit and do nothing? Especially in the new age, right? Just sit and do nothing and think happy thoughts, and you'll shift into 5D, right? That shit, right? And people are so attached to it that people say like, oh, you're a blasphemer and you need to have faith and you need to. It's like all this shit where like people like they're so like, yet again, it's a learned helplessness. Like, people are so defensive of their imaginary heroes, their imaginary heroes, that they don't look at the real hero, which is in the mirror, right? They don't look at like where the real opposition, and not the controlled opposition, pushed by the man. And this is the thing that I've talked about controlled opposition in one of my other videos, where I say the two biggest signs of controlled opposition is that the person is way too popular and their opinions are way too safe, way too mainstream. And so, what does that tell you about religious figures? The fact that people like Jesus or the Buddha or Muhammad, like the fact that, okay, Jesus Christ, for example, why is he the most popular religious figure? That should tell you right there that that's a sign of controlled opposition. He's way too popular, way too mainstream, way too widely accepted as a false savior figure. Controlled opposition. This is the one guy who's going to do it all for us, and all we have to do is sit back. It'll happen like magic, right? The same logic that is behind like the new Earth shift to 5D. It's the exact same shit, just different labels, different false controlled opposition savior figures that are behind this controlled opposition, that are behind this sort of attempt to get people to say like, oh, well, it could never be me, so it should be someone. It's always somebody else outside of yourself, which is a huge program that needs to stop. And another excuse me, I'm all nasally. It's all cold outside, right? But I think I talked about this in a previous video, but it's like the I think I talked about this is kind of off topic, but like the glorified victimhood that people have of like who can be the biggest victim and who can go through like the most trials and tribulations in this lifetime, and this idea that, oh, you need to suffer in order to grow, and you need pain and suffering in order to do this and in order to do that, and you need, it's like a you have to sort of endure, all the hardships of this false life, and it's all bullshit, right? And this is something that I also see particularly in the Christian religion, but also like in the Abrahamic faiths, right? Like I've talked about in another video, where basically like it's a competition. It's basically a competition for who can generate the most loot, right? Who can be the biggest loser, who can be the biggest victim, who can be the biggest doormat and go through the most trials and tribulations, right? And it reminds me of like the book of Job, right? You look at like Job being essentially tortured by this quote unquote loving God, and I think like the story of Job, like the book of Job, should immediately prove that the God of this reality, is evil, just straight up. It's a bunch of bullshit. It's a bunch of games for absolutely no reason at all. Like the existence of pain and suffering is completely unnecessary, right? And people are so used to it that they'll defend the existence of pain and suffering. They'll defend the existence of death and pain and suffering as like, oh well, that's just the way it is, and you have to deal with it, right? People are so programmed to just accept it, right? But going back to the main topic of this video, right? I do believe that a lot of like savior figures, a lot of messiah figures are actually like, on a spiritual level, not just on the political level where you have controlled opposition, your Rogans, your Trumps, your Musks, you know. I'm saying like on the spiritual level, there is also controlled opposition. There is also like the false cavalry that's just over the horizon, that that people people who are aware enough to get to the spiritual stuff of like, oh, this world is evil, and this world is run by demons, and this world is run by entities in the unseen. You have that spiritual awareness of that, but then they sort of get you with like, oh, okay, the only way to truly be saved is Jesus Christ. The only way to truly be saved is to pray to Allah, or to Muhammad or whatever. Like the only way to truly be saved is to follow the ways of the Buddha, right? It's all of this stuff where even if you're aware of the spiritual levels, it's like being aware of political manipulation. Yeah, you can still fall for the controlled opposition psyop, right? Like, oh, okay, there's like elections are rigged, and there's political manipulation, and there's like the banks and the corporations and stuff like that. You can be aware of that, but still fall for the controlled opposition stuff. And it's the same thing with the spiritual level. You're aware if you're aware of the spiritual manipulation, the spiritual distortions in this reality, you can still fall for the controlled opposition. So like that, like yet again, like the benevolent aliens in the New Age, the whole like spirit guides, the whole like the Messiah figures, the Savior, all of that is still, I would suggest, controlled opposition. That all on a spiritual level, all of these people are controlled opposition. Like, and I guarantee, if Jesus was actually an opposition to the system, and maybe he was, man, but like the whole thing is that like, it's a 2,000-year-old game of telephone, and people say like, oh, I know the true Jesus, but no one does, because no one knows who the historical, unless you have a fucking time machine, you don't know who the guy was, and you can get like a sort of a vague understanding of like what the teachings were, but I mean, like no one really fucking knows. And but I would say like if he really was opposed to the system, I feel like he would not be as popular. He would not be allowed to be as popular as he is as a savior figure. So yet again, it's propped up by the system, as a savior figure, as a like an easy sort of scapegoat to say, well, okay, well, I can't do anything, so I'm going to project all of the stuff that I should be doing, all the action that I should be taking on this, Messiah figure, and like, oh, okay, well, it's prophesied, right? It's prophesied, guys, right? It's going to happen. Oh my gosh, it's imminent, right? We're living in the how many times have people said that throughout history? We're living in the end times. Prepare yourself, or like the aliens are coming. The shift into 5D, it's happening, right? It's like all that stuff, right? Like, and with every new year, also you have like it's like a new prophecy. It's like, oh my gosh, this year's gonna be super big, and there's gonna be alien disclosure, and there's gonna be spiritual things happening, and it's like the end times, the prophecies, the Book of Revelation. It's like all the stuff that is just more giving away your power to outside forces. It's more blowing, being blown like a leaf in the wind, being pushed around by circumstance. And I think that belief in the controlled opposition on the spiritual level, the belief in Messiah figures, the belief in, you know, a cavalry that's going to come and save us from this thing, like that shit needs to stop, and people need to see that spiritual controlled opposition for what it really is. That's the video.